Hello aspirants, welcome to Epitome IAS. This is Mansoor. So as a part of this Ncrt series, so far we have finished the 6th and 7th class Ncrt, and in today's class we are going to see the 8th class Ncrt. So in this 8th class Ncrt, we are having 5 chapters. So the chapter number 1, it talks about resources, and in chapter number 2 we are going to see land, soil, natural vegetation and wildlife resources. And in third chapter we are going to see agriculture. In fourth chapter we are going to see industries, and in fifth chapter we are going to see human resources. Okay, so all the chapters which we are going to discuss today is based upon the new ncrts which were published. Okay, so for suppose if you are having old ncrt, try to get a new ncrts, and as per new ncrt only we are going to complete these ncrts. Okay, right. So as I told you earlier, in today's class, we are going to see the chapter number 1. And this chapter number 1 talks about resources. So first of all, what is meant by resource? A resource is something which we will be getting from the nature, or resource is something which would be generated by humans. So for suppose if you consider, there are many things that nature would be providing us. For suppose trees, okay. For suppose the fruits from the trees, and we will be getting some petroleum, crude oil, we will be having rocks, we will be having minerals. Okay, all these things we call it as an resource. But the point here is, there is one more term which we should understand, that is utility. Okay, so what is meant by utility, or what is meant by usability? Utility is nothing but, for suppose if you take electricity, or if you take a rickshaw, or if you take any material, we will be having some common thing in that. What was that common thing? Common thing is that these things were used by us. Okay, so we can call it as, there is some utility, there is some usability in these particular products. Okay, so without having any utility or usability, we cannot tell that particular item or that particular thing as a resource. So the point here is, resource is something which is used by human beings. There should be an usability. Okay, so that particular thing we call it as an utility. Now if you take any resource, resources would be having certain value. Okay, so that value might be economical value, or some resource might not have some economical value. Okay, I'm not only telling that resources are something which should contain economical value, but I'm taking an perspective that there are certain things, resources, where we can be using them in terms of economy. Okay, so those things, or the things, or the resources, definitely in certain way will be having a value, and there are some things which doesn't have any value. Okay, these are the important things we should understand before reading this topic. Now if you see these resources are divided into two resources, two kinds of things. What are they? These resources we can call, or we can divide these resources into two types. So what are they? One, natural resource. Second one is a man-made resource. And even in natural resource, we can differentiate, or we can classify these natural resources into two categories. Okay, so if you take these natural resources also we can classify into two. One, renewable resources. Second one is non-renewable resource. Now what is meant by renewable resource? See, renewable resources are those kind of resources where their renewability speed will be very high. For example, we can tell air as a renewable source of resource, or renewable resource, or we can tell water as a renewable resource, or we can tell sunlight as a renewable resource. Why we are calling these three things as a renewable resource? Because see, if you consume air, or if you are consuming water, or if you are using the sunlight, and this sunlight will be renewed very fast, very soon. Are you getting my point? So those kind of resources we call it as a renewable resources, or we can tell that unlimited resources. Okay, unlimited nature of that resource make it as a renewable resource. Are you getting my point? Now what is meant by non-renewable resources? It is quite opposite to renewable resources. Non-renewable resources are that kind of resources where the renewability of that particular resource would take a lot of time. Sometimes that renewability won't happen. For example, if you take crude oil, see, we are extracting crude oil from surface, deeper layers of the earth, and after extracting, we are starting production of, or we are extracting, we are converting that crude oil into different products. Okay, we will be getting petrol, we will be getting diesel, we will be getting some other petroleum jellies. So the point here is, after a certain point of time, the availability of this crude oil and the renewability of crude oil would be decreased. Okay, so that particular type of resources are called as a non-renewable resources. Now if you see the basic definition which was given in this Ncrt, he is saying that renewable resources are those resources which get renewed or replenished quickly. So some of these are unlimited and are not affected by human activities. Okay, so actually we discussed this, and here he is telling that solar energy and wind energy are examples of renewable resources, but we should take some careful steps. Even though these resources, nowadays we are calling these resources as renewable resources, but in future there is a probability that these renewable resources might be converting into non-renewable resources. Okay, now what is the example of definition of non-renewable resource given in this textbook? He is saying that non-renewable resources are those resources which have limited stocks. We already know that. So once the stocks were exhausted, it would be very difficult, or it would take thousands of years to get renewed or to get replenished. Okay, so the point here is the distribution of these natural resources depends upon the number of physical factors. Okay, for suppose we are telling that water is a non-renewable resource, but if you go to mountain areas, or if you go to arid areas, or if you go to desert areas, there the water is very scarce. Scarcity of water would be there. The point here is the dependency or the availability of these sources, these natural resources, are dependent on certain factors. What are those factors? Obviously, those factors are terrain, climate, and altitude. These three factors are very, very important in terms of the availability of natural resources. Even though these renewable resources are unlimited, but in certain areas it would be very difficult to find those renewable resources. And if you see the distribution of these resources, these natural resources, this distribution of natural resources are not even, they are unevenly distributed. Okay, this is also the point to be remembered. Now the second type of resource is a human made resource. What do you mean by human made resource? Those resources which are converted by humans in order to make their life easier. For suppose, we can call roads, we can call bridges, we can call machinery and vehicles as an man-made resources. So how we are making these man-made resources? Obviously, in order to make bridges or in order to make roads, we have to use renewable resources. We have to use either renewable or non-renewable. That means we have to use natural resources. So in order to construct road, what we have to do? We have to cut off all the trees, and then we have to clear the ground. Then we have to use the other materials which were used in the construction of road. So the point here is, when we are making man-made resources, obviously the natural resources were transformed. Okay, so that resources where human beings are making in order to make their life, that particular resource we can call it as an human made resources. And the point here is, technology is also an important thing which human beings had created. Now if you go deeper into this chapter, he is saying that people are called as an human resources because these people are keep on transforming these particular natural resources. So we can tell that people can be considered as an human resources. Okay, education and health help in making people a valuable resource. Obviously, see, every human being would be helpful in some or other way. Okay, if he is having more education, if he is having a more discipline, or if he is having more healthy, then what happens? That human being can participate, or that human being can contribute to more development of technology, or more construction of roads, or more construction of bridges. So the point here is humans itself are human resources, and the resources made by humans were also called as human resources. Okay, and in order to conserve these resources, conserving of resources is an important topic, because we understood that even though renewable or non-renewable resources are naturally made, so excessive use of these resources would be very difficult in order to survive, because the availability of those resources would become less. Now the point here is, in conserving of resources, we have to understand two terms. One, resource conservation. Second one is sustainable development. So what is in by resource conservation? Resource conservation is nothing but using resources carefully. Okay, even though we have unlimited resources, we have to use them carefully. That particular term is called as an resource conservation. And second term is sustainable development. What is meant by sustainable development? Sustainable development is nothing but balancing the need of resources, and we have to conserve those resources for future use. Okay, for suppose if we are having 1,000 liters of crude oil presented on the earth, we should not consume that 1,000 liters of crude oil in single day, or single year, or single decade. We have to carefully use that particular resource, so that the future needs, future generational needs are catered. So that particular term we call it as an sustainable development. Okay, and if you see here, there are 6 principles that were, or that should be focused in sustainable development. What are those 6 principles? The first principle is, we have to respect and we have to care for all the forms of life. So you should not think that you are the only being, or you are the only person to consume all the resources. We have to give respect and we have to care for all the forms of life, not only human beings, even animals or even creatures are also the part of this earth. And second principle is, we have to focus on improving the quality of human life. And third principle is conservation of the earth's diversity. Okay, and the fourth principle is, we have to minimize the depletion of natural resources. And fifth principle is, we have to change personal attitude and practices towards the environment. And the sixth principle would be, we have to focus on enabling the communities to care for their own environment. Okay, so these are the things that were given in this particular chapter. This is very small chapter, and in this chapter what we have learned is, we have learned that what is meant by utility and what is meant by value, and we have learned that resources are of two types. One, natural resource. Second one is man-made resource. And again, we are having classification in natural resources. We classified them as renewable as well as non-renewable resources. And we have seen some examples of renewable resources, and we have seen some examples of non-renewable resources. And in man-made resources, we understood what is man-made resources and how human beings themselves were the part of these human resources. And then we have seen conservation of resources. In conservation of resources, we have seen two important terms. One, resource conservation. Second, sustainable development. And after that, we have seen 6 principles of sustainable development. So this is very small chapter. So it would be taking only 5 to 6 minutes to understand this particular chapter. So thank you so much for watching this video. In next video, we will be meeting with the second chapter, that is land, soil, water, natural vegetation and wildlife resources.